Hello, hello. I guess we're
Hello.
live.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, my name is Andre, and I'm sort of a moderator here, but I guess it still will be like discussion among equals, so we're not gonna set any rules. So my name is Andre. I work as a DevOps consultant, and I help companies, with lots of automation, including security practices. And I guess Lucas and Andre can also say a couple of words about themselves. Maybe Lucas can start.
Yeah, sure. Lucas Oberhuber. I'm CTO and co-founder at hiphops.io. And our whole business is about solving the problem of releasing code and automating process. And we feel that current CI/CD is slow to write, slow to run, and forces teams to do all kinds of hacky code. And our solution is to solve that by focusing on the main problems that development teams have, which is collaboration and speed. So that's a real brief version of that.
Okay, that leaves me. My name is Andrei Divatkin. I'm also in consulting. Used to do a lot of CI/CD consulting back in the days when Jenkins used to be a cool thing. And some time ago, which is I think more than 7 years now, switched to cloud and specializing in cloud engineering for AWS for startups. And together with my co-founder, leading a small boutique consultancy who helps startups around Europe and US to get the AWS infrastructure from the ground and make sure it's secure, plus recording DevSecOps Talks podcast. So, which kind of comes together with the topic of the panel. So that's me.
Right. Yeah, thank you, folks. So, actually, my first question, or my first topic, so to say, would be what do you think of software bill of materials? Because, I mean, it recently became sort of, a hot topic in the security industry, at least. And what's your experience of using different NASBOM tools? How do you use it in your, consulting gigs or your organizations? Do you use it at all? Yeah, maybe expose your opinion on that.
You want to go first, Andre?
Yeah, I guess
I,
so.
I could. Yes. So, since our client base is startups, the software bill of materials is not very high on a risk scale, right? Since when you do security, you want to have your risk analysis to see what's attack vectors, where is your exposure, and then you prioritize stuff that has the highest risk and the highest impact. And I think the whole open source supply chain attack becoming the thing now this year. If you listen Security Now podcast, for instance, they were discussing that there are tons of Node.js packages being published, malicious Node.js packages would use the typo in the name of the package, hoping that some developer will fat finger it and add it to their software product and then run NCI and maybe get CI credentials that usually admin, send it back to the mothership so they can try to exploit that particular account. So yeah, that's becoming a reality now. So everyone needs to pay attention to this space. So that's why as bombs are important. However, again, working with a group of people I work with, it wasn't as high. So I don't really have much exposure. I trying to follow the news, but no more than that, I would say, at the moment.
Yeah.
Lucas?
Yeah, my exposure is similar in that I'm aware of the concepts and actually aware of the need as well, but haven't used it as a formal component in what we're doing. What we're seeing is that even startups where there's a modicum of regulatory oversight, that there's a need to track quite carefully what you're building. And by the way, one of my other roles is as a maintainer of GIMP on the Mac, so the open source photo editor. And there I also want to know. And what it comes down to is you want to know what's in the package. And it's not just, in my opinion, for security reasons, but in general, when you put a whole package and you release it, it can be really tricky to know what got built in, especially if you're using sources that update regularly. Obviously, if you've got a yarn.lock or something like that, it's fair, your software bill of materials is fairly straightforward, right? It's all there, but not all tools have the benefit of that. And that yarn.lock isn't always also checked into source code, as it should be for any end component. So I think there's a variety of factors in there, but treating that bill of materials as a component that documents the release you've made, I think, is a really important thing for people to do. And if that's possible, it should be done. It's not always easy, but yeah, even in the open source, I've started printing out, what are all the components that are included, just so I can go back and look at the logs and see. So yeah, it's not just for security, it's bugs as well.
Yeah, Andre.
One thing I wanted to add is, if you go back to 5-10 years ago, the big corporations had the whole shebang about open source software, and the primary concern there was licensing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you had stuff like White Source and others actually scanning what goes in your software and trying to prevent a situation where you would link your software with something that is licensed under GPL, right? So then you have to open source. That would force you to open source your proprietary software. Now you just feed it to ChatGPT without thinking. So, but back in the day, that was a concern, and that's why, for instance, companies like Google are known to actually have their own repositories with the libraries. You wouldn't pull jar files from the Maven Central. They would have their own builds, making sure that everything's nice and secure and built from source, and there is nothing injected on the way there. However, now for us as end users, people who build pipelines, we theoretically could produce SBOM, right? But would you check each SBOM by hands? Probably not. So
Probably not.
we now see industry maturing, right? So we see the common standards. I think that's a first good step in that direction. If we can all agree on a standard, how it should look like, because then the tooling can support it. So there are multiple players in this area, which I see is package managers. They need support that and output it automatically. So there is, as you mentioned, Lucas, yarn.log, you might have your requirement.txt or pom.xml, what have you, go.mod. Well, that's not SBOM, right? You might have tree of dependencies, so you might not see everything that comes in there. In the best case scenario, you would want to have this information augmented with the CVEs, if there are any known CVEs that you're pulling in. And then you need to have some overarching software that tracks your security posture supporting SBOMs. I'm thinking of tools like SecureFrame, Drata, like those that would track your cloud, that will track what's running in your pipelines, and that eventually would track SBOMs. So we're in early days, and doing something today would take an effort, because you have basically building it at home. I mean, we will have a homegrown solution. I hope to see the tools supporting SBOMs soon, maybe within this year.
Yeah, actually, speaking of my experience, there are many clients that I see now that they're actually investing in commercial tools that are doing this overarching of an analysis of SBOM thingies. Like there's some are using GitLab solutions, security solutions like GitLab Ultimate. Some are using JFrog X-Ray. Some are using Fossa. There are a few others that I don't remember, but it's still it's really, at least from my perspective, it seems like people are starting to look into being more serious about collecting SBOM data and actually analyzing that, not just running that pipeline and forgetting. No, it's actually the people who are analyzing that and knowing which licenses we're using, which vulnerabilities we potentially may have in our dependencies. So yeah, it's changing for sure. And as you mentioned, NPM and Yarn and probably some other package managers, they also improve in reporting you potential vulnerabilities, which is a good thing. Of course, a good thing.
Can I ask a question? This may be a little bit controversial. I don't know. But isn't the core problem that a lot of the open source software isn't properly supported or doesn't have much funding behind it, right? So, companies are, saving millions of dollars, pounds, whatever, on software, all of us, right, that we can include for free, but then not really spending the money to make sure that that software stays secure, to, ensure the ecosystem. And that feels like a bit of the core problem, right? That, like it's not just that, like we're putting a plaster on top of it by putting a tool that says, oh, is this your SBOM? But, you typo squatting and all those things that get involved. I still feel like I don't know. It's a question actually more than a statement.
To be honest, I think it's improving. I mean, if we take like 10 years back, definitely big enterprises didn't invest into open source that much. But nowadays, I think they do, maybe not directly, maybe not openly, but they really do help with some sponsorship, some extra time they give to their employees to spend on the open source. So it's definitely improving, at least from what I see.
Yeah, plus we have tools now to facilitate that. So you have GitHub sponsorship, for instance, where it's easy to give people money. You have Patreon, which might not be as related to software development, but you can utilize it. So there are ways to get money. Before that, 10 years ago, like what will it be, 2016, you would have maybe PayPal to get money from strangers, right? That was like the only avenue for getting sponsored.
Do you think the money's flowing to the packages that sort of carry the most risk, or like does it? Because I hear a lot about open source developers being quite overwhelmed. Certainly, on GIMP we've got a lot of things, and we do try to stay on top of the security items, but it's non-trivial.
So another aspect of this, I would say, a little bit changing gears, is SBOM is something new now that industry is looking into. But if it takes that back a couple of years, we had Dependabot for how much time now, which technically solves the same problem, isn't it? It basically goes and can tell you that, well, there is update for the library you got, and now it also tells you that you have a CVE in there, in that library, potentially. So then it's only a question of the library being up to date behind it.
Yeah. Actually, maybe another topic that we can probably discuss is that, of course, when there's like a dependency that has a CVE, like highly critical CVE, then and that dependency has lots of other dependents, then solving that thing is really is showing us the maturity of the organization. Because if you can solve the CVE with your dependencies in a matter of hours, then you're good, right? And you're secure. If it takes you months, and actually I've seen, I guess you've heard about Log4Shell, Log4j vulnerability. I know companies that were solving that issue for months, and like that aspect of security actually would be how mobile, how continuous delivery you are, so to say, how efficient you are. And that's what many companies kind of miss as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I've founded a company with that at the core, which is getting software out quickly and making sure not just that it is secure, but that it is also meeting the needs of the business, and that it can be done in a way that's developer friendly is something I'm super passionate about. And it's really painful to see companies that can't fix even well-known vulnerabilities. But I've seen it in practice how hard it is to get your fleet of devices all to the right place and keep everything going, right? It's just very, very painful. And philosophically, if I think about the software environment these days, it's far more complex than it was even 10 years ago, right? Just, we all have highly available multi region, software running. That just wasn't possible, 10, 20 years ago, that was impossible. But now the complexity of managing is much, much higher. And I don't think the tooling's kept up. So I think that's a big part of it. And then the tooling and then also the internal processes, right? Like it might be, I don't know what you saw, but maybe like if you describe, it took 6 months to get the log4j resolved, but how much of that was human process related and approvals related, like even though
It's most of that was
right?
human things.
I'd be curious to hear what your experience there was.
Yeah, just lack of resources, lack of process, lack of automation. That's why. So basically, most of the updates have to be done by humans, verified by humans, redeployed by humans. Sometimes the code was written by some people who are not in the company anymore, and was a few years, several years old, still running in prod, still working. But now you have to fix vulnerability, and that's
no one's
that's
built it in 6 years, right? Yeah.
Actually, we get a question. Usually the application code is scanned for code quality and availability, as well as infrastructure code is often skipped, unfortunately. Do you use any tools to scan your infrastructure as code, such as Terraform? I'm aware of tools like TerraSec, Checkov. I'm curious about your approach. So yeah, basically, do we check infrastructure as code tools? Do you?
I would say. I would. So I had a conversation with multiple CISOs, and both of them, without knowing, were repeating each other, saying, "You're running that Terraform thing in your pipeline. I just gonna use new resource and pop the reverse shell out of your worker and take your credentials from there. So game over." Science, again, usually in CI/CD, you would have over-permissioned workers that can do whatever. And yeah, you could scan your Terraform files, but again, if you talk about priorities, I would say securing your CI/CD server would be a higher priority than actually scanning your Terraform spec files, because let's just admit that, because most of those scanners do grep without understanding semantics. And if you do any type of advanced IAM, all those scanners will go bananas, because you would have in your IAM, you will have AWS principal star. But then you have conditions that would limit on the organizational unit level and stuff like that. But they don't understand that, which kind of defeats the purpose, right? So they will give you a lot of warnings that will be false positive, that will create a noise, that will drain you mentally, right? But, well, secure your CI/CD server. I would start there first, because then if your CI/CD is secure, if your workers are isolated, so if you're running, if you're doing Terraform plan in isolated environment and you cannot laterally move from there to other environments, you're in a quite good place. Even if they pop out the reverse shell from there, so what? That's ephemeral workers that's going to die in 15 minutes. And in order to exploit those credentials, they need to be really fast and noisy, which will aid detection. So I would start from understanding your priorities, ranking them, and then working from there. And I'm not sure that infrastructure's code scanning will be very high there. You might have
also,
a bigger fish to fry.
maybe the infrastructure as code tooling like Terraform or CloudFormation or Ansible, it's actually supporting so many different targets, objects, resource types that it's basically impossible to cover everything with tools like Checkov or TerraSec or whatever. I mean, you probably will cover some elements of security with that, but most likely it will be based only on Amazon cloud only, and then you forget about Google, Azure, and any other cloud, any other provider of Terraform. So yeah, it's in general it's very hard. So actually, I would agree with Andrei that you probably should start thinking about security on higher level, like CI/CD pipeline, maybe your infra, maybe design your IAM in a better way. That's what probably may make you more secure. On the other hand, there is actually another attack vector with Terraform and other infrastructure as code tools which support modules, where you actually the module that you grab from the internet may contain some some credential sending to some random dude, and that's
Or
it's
some
not yet a
political
problem.
statements.
Yeah, exactly. It's not yet a
Yeah.
problem, I think, in the wild, but it may potentially become a problem in the future when when you're using some well-known Terraform module and suddenly your whole infrastructure is being exposed to Bitcoin mining. Yeah.
Just
Yeah, go
before
ahead.
you go, Lucas, one small thing I wanted to mention. So what's happening here when you do linting of anything, right? So you trying to prevent things from happening by outing for them, trying to not let them go in. So you have a gate where you're preventing bad things from coming in. But think about that. What if the bad things cannot happen, right? So in AWS and maybe in other clouds, I don't know, my domain is AWS. That's why I'm talking AWS. You have things like service control policies, which can prohibit the bad things from happening. You can, even if you have a root permissions, you cannot do that. So for instance, if you don't want people to open port 22, just prohibit that on SCP level and don't bother scanning for that, right? Because you don't want that to happen. If you have list of things you know that you don't want to happen, prohibit them in the first place. Don't play with fire, trying to catch it in a pipeline. Just prohibit them straight away, and let people go through the pipeline faster. Yeah, sorry,
think-
Lucas, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, like I'm also not someone using a lot of tooling around the infrastructure as code, and I think as you both stated, the Terraform and even just the native versions are fairly thin layers. They're descriptive layers of actions to take. They aren't really semantically I know they're supposed to be semantically meaningful, but as you say, it's your service account that decides what you can actually do, and that's not part of your Terraform, or maybe it is over here, but all of those interconnections are what decides. And then it's still quite hard as a human as well to understand what the implications are of what's open, what's not, what should be and what shouldn't be. And I think this is part of that explosion of complexity, which is the optionality that you have as you develop your security is enormous, right? And now it's how we're composing that security that's grabbing us, instead of a particular, we have a firewall and we've blocked port 22 outbound and inbound. Okay, great. But now now all these components need to talk to each other, and some of them also talk to the internet, and some do this and some do that, and there's all these service accounts. And I think that the complexity has gone up. The possibility of being highly secure has gone way up as well, but the complexity has gone up. So anyway, yeah, long-winded.
One thing here is that the security professionals, they talk about defense in depth. So an easy way to remember that, do you remember Shrek? The cartoon Shrek, where they walk with the donkey through the field, and Shrek says, we orcs or ogres, we are like onion. We have layers, you have to peel them off. So it's the same here. You want to have those layers. So if something gets breached by mistake, maybe you open up something by mistake, you still have another layer of defense, and also something that would ring the bell about the things that is happening.
Yeah, you're talking about. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
You were talking about securing your CI/CD server, and that I think is a big part, right? Like automation and automated pathways are critical, because otherwise security ends up being the thing that blocks you from doing anything. And it's only automation that only allows secure pathways that are then extremely flexible to get that new code live is the only way out of that trap. And that's, I think, and so people are like, I can deliver more quickly. Well, if you don't have the security posture in there, you haven't brought your security left, or however you want to put it, it's testing, it's all the different parts, you can't do it. And yeah,
actually in that regard, I would mention that security is it's a feature It's a feature of your platform. It's a feature of your product, and you have to think about that as any other part of your product. And that's what, unfortunately, I see that development teams are not taking care about at all, or they don't even have this part of the like planning sprints or whatever. When they're planning the software, they don't really plan how potentially the software can be broken, and they kind of leave it to the security people or to someone who is not involved. And that's what actually I advise doing. Some of my clients is that they actually do threat modeling as one of the retrospective exercises. So just basically to understand from where the threat can come, and then express that model as a unit test, as an integration test, and as a policy, and try to run this test periodically from outside the infra, from inside the infra. Then you can at least have some understanding what's going on with the security level and whether we are good or bad.
Also have your developers being actually prohibited doing something in production and see how they will work around the system. That will give you a threat modeling. Because they know their ways around. They know where your security is not super great, and they will try to exploit that. So just watch them, see what they do, and say like, okay, what you did is maybe not the best. Let's see how we could give you the capabilities you need without sacrificing security.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's one of the scariest, right? Which is that in the end, someone has to have access to this stuff, because otherwise it doesn't exist, right? And so how do you keep that surface area small, right? The LastPass breach is a great example of that. Where, it was a laptop of one of the senior DevOps, or platform engineers, who had downloaded, I guess he was using it for personal purposes as well, and had downloaded a Linux movie viewer, I think it was, something like that.
I think he was hosting a Plex server on his work laptop, exposed to the internet.
Oh, was it exposed? Well, yeah. Anyway, like the fact that there's code that breaches things, yeah, we know that, right? But the fact that then also had access to, well, I mean, then it went through backups and into the main system and all around, right? And it's just like that escalation of privileges throughout. But it came through.
It wasn't very hard really on their end, because what I read from their disclosure is that they compromised LastPass account that they used internally. In there, they had a node with hard-coded AWS keys for the static user for the encryption keys. Really, in 2023, where AWS will scream at you, stop using static users, you're actually using static users and hard-code those keys in a node and LastPass. Not good.
But as you know, like in the real world, it's very, very hard to have made your software perfect, let alone perfectly secure, right? And so the way someone gets in ends up feeling like it was super obvious. But, like if you have 10,000 things, you got 9,999 of them not doing the stupid thing. It's just hard, right?
Yeah, that's why I want to go back to the statement that I did like in the early beginning. And I'm not advertising the tools I'm mentioning. I'm not an affiliated in any way, but I saw them being used in multiple organizations, and the impact was really good. So it's like stuff that overarch all your efforts that you do with security, like SecureFrame, Drata. I think they're the biggest, they're probably European based. And what these tools gives you, they basically build your security program for you. You have your documentation, your endpoint management, you have your AWS scanning, you have your code vulnerability, but you have all of that in one place. And that's very important, right? Because when you start scanning your Docker images for CVEs, okay, so scanning, you have this piece of information in one system. Then you have your CVEs in your software libraries and GitHub dependable, that's another system. Then you have your trusted advisor, security hub, what have you in AWS. That's the one more system, but you don't have one big picture of everything. And I mean, I think those tools are not cheap, but they do help quite a bit of one place where you log in and you see all your problems in one place, somewhat. So it can it can trick you into the self sense of security, because like, okay, so it says 100% green. It's not. I mean, it's like what they know, what they check, right? They're probably more, and you have to do a threat modeling and stuff like that still. But this tool covers a big foundation that you don't need to do on your own. So if you're looking to start doing something, look into those tools or some other tools, like Google what alternatives are. If you don't like pricing, there might be other alternatives. I'm sure that this whole area of continuous compliance, it's just starting to pop up. It's maybe 2 or 3 years old now, and I'm pretty sure there will be more competition coming on the market. Or maybe you are looking for a startup idea. That's a startup idea. Go do it. There are big money to be earned there. So
Yeah, absolutely.
something like that would help you to advance your security program and
Yeah.
get whole overview of everything you're doing, and then you can start prioritize.
Actually, and another type of tools that I would really probably recommend looking into is software information and event manager. Something that not only treats your static software and gets the benefits of that, but also looks at the events happening in the system at the time. Because sometimes anomalies basically are the breaches, the attacks that happens. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had a breach in one of the companies, and we accidentally noticed that spam was sent from one of the accounts. Look at the audit log, which we luckily had, and somehow the password was leaked, and we got logins from Pakistan, Malaysia, Brazil for the account that basically for a person who stayed in Latvia, and that was really suspicious. So observing the anomalies is something that probably we will get better with that when more AI will happen. But yeah, it's definitely something that you should look at as a company, because that's important.
I wanted to mention just like in some ways I feel like we're talking a lot about cloud security almost, right? But it actually ends up being that your environment is the cloud, the connections local, right? So and local, by the way, can be remote local, but VPN, like whatever, and the devices, and then the humans, right? Because quite a lot of this is also human engineering, right? And that could be insider threat, insider blackmail as well, right? In theory, as well as someone just getting convinced to do something they shouldn't do, like hand over their password somehow. So, I think all of those things are part of that security environment. And then I think you both kind of mentioned it, but you can't. There's no such thing as a completely secure environment. It just doesn't exist. And so you've got to find a way to also be on the lookout.
Right. It boils down to economics, right? So you don't want to be a low-hanging fruit for attacker, some script kiddie who just downloads script, sprays it all over internet, and then your system comes up because it's available. I've been talking to one company, and they said, "Look, we're gonna host Vault on DigitalOcean, and it will be exposed to internet, and they're gonna put all our stuff in there." And then I introduced them to Shodan, saying like, "That's Shodan." And we're going to type in the DigitalOcean Vault, and that basically gives us all the Vault instances hosted on DigitalOcean with a version of the Vault. And I'm saying like, okay, so now we're just going to go and check CVEs and see who is ahead in this race of updating their software and see how we can exploit it. So, I mean, HashiCorp Vault is a solid product, and exposing that to the internet might not be the bad idea, but it's hard to hack, really. I mean, they know what they're doing, but still, just don't expose stuff you don't need to expose. Have either VPN or cloud zero trust type of solution, like Cloudflare Warp. I mean, I think it's called Cloudflare Teams now. So have some behavioral analytics, so it doesn't just need to have one key. There are multiple things that needs to match. But the whole idea here is you want to spend time to reverse the economics, right? So the reward that people get in the end when they breach you is less that amount of effort and resources they spend to do so. If it is so, then most opportunistic attackers, they will just move on to an easier target. If you have ATP behind you, some nation state, there is nothing you can do. They will find a way in because they have unlimited resources, much more than you have in any company. But what you could do as a practitioner is defend from script kiddies and opportunistic attacks. If someone is after you, that's tough.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, but also, the products like Vault, the products like LastPass, and maybe some other password managers, they most likely will be under attack, like continuous attack all the time. Because if there's if there's a breach, if there's a hack that exists, this probably will bring a lot of economical benefits to the hacker because they can access other systems after that.
My feeling is that I'm talking from my personal perspective, my feelings, not backed by any data. But my feeling is if I would be an attacker, I think still phishing is the most efficient way in, right? So you just spam person with emails and eventually the person will click something. Now with ChatGPT, it's even easier to craft convincingly looking emails. You can find domains that will look convincingly, and then person clicks, you end up on their computer, at least in their browser, right? And then if the person is lazy and he has his password manager extension in the browser, hey, now we are talking, right? The nice thing actually about 1Password, if you're using 1Password, is the last version they released, 1Password 8, which I think is like about 1 year old now. They have a shortcut that you could click. I think it's Shift Command Space, and then you will have a search window pop up where you can copy your password from. So you don't need the browser extension, but still, if you reach the browser sandbox and if you can actually call that from outside of the browser, then again, people can try to pull it from your computer or exploit your endpoint. So this is, I think, the battleground now, especially like in a remote age that we are living in.
Yeah, actually, there's another kind of type of attack that probably will start happening more frequently now. Is that you don't need to send emails. You can actually make a call and pretend you're someone else, and maybe someone else that the victim knows. Simulate their voice, and then extract some information that you don't supposed to know. So it's becoming more and more challenging.
I have to do a training. The matter of speaking, like yesterday, we got a phishing email in our company sent from my name to one of the employees. Someone was trying to guess his email, so they guessed it wrong, and it went to the catch-all inbox. I was like basically guy pretending to be me, so the name was mine, but the email address was different. And in a Google Suite, it was obvious because all over the place. The name is the same as in the organization, but it's not the same guy. But the email was asking for a WhatsApp number. I'm not sure what you're going to be doing with his WhatsApp number, but someone needed it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we have like maybe 7 minutes left. Maybe one last topic I would like to touch a bit. Some companies, they are very cautious about security, and they may be like too cautious. They are like too strict on the rules. Like, for example, not allowing developers to install stuff on their machines. That would probably that probably work for LastPass, right? Who had a breach, but in general, what do you think? Is it a good practice? Is it a bad practice to make it too strict, especially for technical people, like we are?
I mean, I've certainly, in my previous companies, been part of a company that had a much stricter policy than we did around these things. But then we were also talking about really locking down our systems as well for security reasons. The issue is like the cost of doing it, right? The cost of doing it, if you're going to hamstring all your developers, some of your most expensive people, that isn't a big value add. and it's very, very, very expensive. And so you hear stories about banks not being able to release more than once every 6 months. That isn't, I just don't see that as being a recipe for staying relevant or even in business as a company these days. And I think that you can do much better approaches. Now, maybe locking down laptops is the right way, or maybe having a very efficient way of going, this is acceptable and this is not. And I think we all agree that yes, the open source supply chain is a risk, but it might not be the biggest risk. There are many other risks. And in reality, the open source supply chain, it generally has been relatively good. Now some of the bigger breaches, but the bigger the breach is always going to be based on the popularity of the thing, right? Windows gets breached a lot more than Mac OS, which probably gets breached much more than like a specific flavor of Debian, because the value is just very different. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. And I think through automation, you can get around a lot of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a big proponent of the virtualization and having things in their own boxes. In one company I worked, they actually had virtual desktops, remote desktops. They only have a client on your machine, and then you do all the work on that machine, which is somewhat locked down, but then the source code doesn't leave the company at all. Everything stays there, and those type of environments are much easier to standardize, make sure that people have all the tools, and also sanitize, making sure there is nothing that shouldn't be there. Because then when you have also using the laptop for something else, and people do that, I mean, they go social media, they go to sites that they shouldn't be going, and so on and so on. They even browse their email, right? That could be phished. So if you have that type of separation, you have your machine, but actual work you do is somewhere else, or at least isolated, for instance, using virtual machines that are running locally. So if you have everything there, that will give you another layer of defense. Again, be like Shrek, has those layers. So, but actually, personally, I'm still stuck with the local virtual machines that requires more resources that I would typically be needed. And I'm still on the lookout for a good solution that would provide a virtual server that I could use. So Amazon provides some, but connectivity is not always perfect. So you have this lag that might drive you crazy a little bit. Plus, it's kind of on expensive scale what they have. So the cloud gaming seems to be taking off, and I hope that advances in the cloud gaming will also drive that desktop virtualization. And then we might have some viable solutions. So if anyone knows something that works really well for someone, let me know. I would love to try.
Did you try Gitpod?
Oh, I don't think so. No, I've been looking into the what GitHub has. GitHub Workspace.
Gitpod. I wrote it in the private chat. To be honest, I also see this tendency that development environments or like development tooling is sort of migrating not fast but like slowly into the cloud, and that's because there's Eclipse Thea, like the IDE that you can just run in the cloud on any machine. So I think it's sort of the future. So I kind of agree with you that in the future we will have everything that as developers we need. We will have it in controlled environment, but in like more flexible environment than let's say a strictly configured laptop, so to say.
Yeah,
I still think they have a long.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's still a long way, because when you use cloud-based IDEs, if it's in your browser and then you accidentally hit the back button, there's just certain things that like make it really
fix the browser then.
Yeah, the browser just isn't actually an entirely reliable app environment, right? It's still
you would need to have a native client for that. So back then in that company we used Citrix, and there was like almost no lag. You feel like you're working locally actually. So that worked pretty good. But at the same time, I was also in the same country where they had data.
And
The place
using
where you have
SSH,
servers.
right, or PIM or something. I don't know. Once it gets graphical, I've not seen anything that's. But I think all these things end up being a trade-off, right? What are you trading off? Where are you putting the protective spaces, and where are you putting your layers? And yeah, there's no one size fits all on that. But there is the one size that fits all is if you don't, as you said, you're both Andre, but like you have to design it in. It's got to be there from the beginning. It can't be an afterthought. Be like building a house with no doors and then expecting to lock them. It's not a good.
Yeah. So after all, it's all about developer experience and security. Security should be about developer experience after all, because without that, it will be hard. Okay, folks, I think we should be wrapping up. It's like 4:15. I think our time is over. Thank you very much for insightful discussion, and we don't have any questions incoming, so I guess audience is happy. And thank you very much. Yeah, on board.
All right. Nice meeting you guys.
Nice meeting you both. Take care.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
This is all we got. Remember the revolution in our minds. This is all we got.
Lock me out of this life institution. I am angry and I on illusions. Yes, I hate, but it's not a solution. Try my best, buddy, I'm just a human. Oh, we don't